So anyways, thanks everyone for taking the time and making the effort to attend this presentation, an update on the new Saskatchewan Immune Globulin Optimization Program. And I think most of you know me, but I'm Donna Ledingham, so I'm a hematopathologist here in Regina, Qu'Appelle. So for a presentation of this nature, I thought I'd disclose the fact, I have no conflicts of interest other than that I am a Saskatchewan taxpayer. And I'd like to share some thank yous. One is to Elaine Blaze, who is the Transfusion Safety Manager in North Sask, who shared many of these slides with me. And also to the Provincial Blood Coordinating Office of BC for sharing their dose calculator tools. So today the purpose is to describe our new immune globulin optimization program for Saskatchewan. Just to give you a setting of the development of the program and the reasons that it's come into being, and introduce the individual components of the program, particularly the guidelines, the physician's order form, which also serves as a data collection tool, the stop the line process that was developed in the Saskatoon RPIW, and just briefly introduce the IVIG dose calculator. And I'm hoping to leave quite a bit of time at the end for questions and discussion, because the timelines of this project have shifted, and I apologize for that, but I hope by the end of this you'll see that it has been necessary. So recently my colleagues and I in Regina took an IHI course on patient blood management, and if anyone has a chance to take an IHI course, I commend them to you. They're excellent. I think it's International Healthcare Improvement Institute. Anyways, and we learned a fact that it takes 17 years for clinical evidence to start changing day-to-day care. And so I think that is really speaks to our need to kind of move evidence more quickly into clinical practice, and that is actually a fairly challenging thing. So for those of you who don't know IVIG well, and I think many people do, but for those of you who don't, so IVIG is definitely a blood product. It's derived from plasma. So informed consent for blood and blood products is required. So essentially it stands for intravenous immune globulin. It's processed from human plasma, as I said. It contains more than 90% IgG. So basically it's a concentrate of the IgG antibodies that normally circulate in our blood to help fight infection. And it is made in batches from the plasma of thousands of donors. And there are many, many steps to reduce pathogen transmission. But if there's a problem with one of those large batches, the recall can affect a significant proportion of the Canadian supply. So I think having seen Dr. Alpert walk into the room here, it was interesting to sit with him at lunch one day this spring and have him say that, well, if we lose one more batch, we're going to be down to a 2-week supply in the country. So I think that is not a theoretical, but that is an actual possibility. And it was certainly very concerning for me to know that we might be in that situation. So IVIG is not made in Canada. Plasma from Canadian donors is sent to manufacturing plants in other countries, mostly the US, or it's purchased from the US and Europe. And I think I'm just making this point to say, when I've got the Deutschmark symbol, that every time our dollar is low, that obviously impacts the cost of the product. And gram for gram IVIG is as or more expensive than gold. So it is a very, not just a precious product, but an expensive one. So what is IVIG used for? And just in very basic terms, IVIG is used to increase normal immunity for people who don't have a normal immune system. So for those people who have an inherited immunodeficiency, a lack of normal antibodies, or what they call a secondary immunodeficiency, so they have another disease that suppresses their ability to make antibodies, we can give them IVIG that gives them antibodies and helps them fight infection. So in those cases, it can certainly save them a lot of morbidity and even mortality. Another, large use of IVIG is to decrease abnormal immunity. And I mean, we could do a master's class on the whole reasons and mechanisms how this works. But what it basically does is it dampens abnormal or blocks abnormal immune responses to certain things. So In terms of Health Canada approved indications where IVIG is used to treat autoimmune disease, immune thrombocytopenia, or ITP, is a big one, and chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, or CIDP. And there are many, these are just the Health Canada licensed indications listed here. There are many, many other conditions for which IVIG is used to treat with varying levels of evidence. So these are certainly not the only conditions. But anyway, so this just gives you a sense of its clinical utility. So Canada, I think, still is the #1 per capita user of IVIG in the world. And within Canada, Saskatchewan is one of the highest per capita users. And as you can see here, our use has been growing steadily since 2009. So this graph represents the use in SHR in red and RQHR, so our largest health regions in grams per year. And you can see here it's being steadily increasing with a bit more of a slope in RQHR. Some of this use may be attributable to an increased incidence of the diseases IVIG treats. And IVIG is, of course, dosed by weight. So as we as a nation, as a population, become more overweight or even obese, that may also drive an increased use. But really, we're not certain of the reasons behind the increase because we don't collect any data systematically at a provincial level. So, I mean, definitely IVIG therapy can be life-saving. It can provide great improvements to life. But there are definitely both common and serious risks of IVIG use. And I think I need not speak to the people here in the room who've seen many of the IVIG infusions that make people feel lousy in terms of headache, flushing, nausea, chills, minor but unpleasant symptoms. And then there are serious systemic reactions it's been estimated 2 to 6%, which can include aseptic meningitis, anaphylaxis, acute renal failure, and some pretty significant hemolysis. So obviously, we have a strong incentive for many reasons to use IVIG wisely for clinical indications for which there's a known or reasonable expectation of benefit so that we can tip that risk-benefit equation more on the side of benefit. So due to these concerns, there was a provincial RPIW was conducted in Saskatoon last June. And the notion there was to develop a strategy to assess and monitor IVIG utilization in Saskatchewan. And the goal was to optimize the use of IVIG in the province. And it established a framework for the program, including Saskatchewan IVIG guidelines developed in consultation with Saskatchewan physicians. So that, I think, was a very significant achievement in a week. And the program's intent was to be patient-first and practitioner-friendly. So that RPIW built the framework, and the framework's components, and I'll expound on them a bit later, but just to list them now, were the development of the program guidelines, so once again a very significant achievement in a week. Development of a physician request form that would allow both the request of the IVIG and data tracking so we can get a sense of where IVIG is going. And there was development of a stop-the-line process for an incorrect or an incomplete IVIG request form. So obviously, life-threatening situations, care will not be held up. But the doctors themselves, and I'm going to say this, the doctors themselves in Saskatoon owned that they had to be made to fill out the form properly or they just wouldn't do it. And I think if we're in a situation where we are potentially in a shortage and we have no data, it's very important that we get these data so that we can understand exactly who's getting IVIG for what indication, how severe is it, and how regularly do they receive it. So again, so that's a stop-the-line issue. So I think that is quite new. Another component would be an ABO blood group and an IgA level to be done on all patients prior to the initiation of treatment. And I think many clinicians do that, but just to standardize it as a best practice in terms of assessing the risk of adverse events. That the use of an IVIG dose calculator would be promoted, and I'll go into that a bit later. And that's as regards to use the ideal or adjusted body weight dosing, especially in obese and overweight patients. And finally, some supplemental information for patients was developed to get a consistent message out to patients about kind of what the risks and benefits that they may expect to get. So the program was conceived as a very ambitious and comprehensive program, and there were definite challenges in implementing something like this just right from the get-go, going from 0 to 60 very quickly. So you can see here that this is some of my colleagues, Judy and Paula Van Vliet and Elaine, and I'm probably back here lying in the snow somewhere wondering how exactly we're going to get this done. I think another issue that has been raised is that we really have no baseline data meaningfully in the province to, identify areas that might be particularly problematic or even serve as a basis for comparison if and when changes are made. So again, I'm sort of lying in the snow wondering what I'm going to do. And fortunately, the VP of Quality and Transformation here was kind enough to offer us the opportunity to have another RPIW on IVIG here in Regina in order to implement the program. So to take this very excellent theoretical concept and make it happen in the real world, particularly the stop the line piece, because I think that's very new in us all saying to physicians, hey, stop, you got to fill this piece of paper out properly. So, Saskatoon had done tremendous groundwork. It was just a matter of getting that some of that excellent theory onto the ground. And I think it really demonstrated the power of the RPIW approach in which frontline staff are brought into the room to talk about how things are done, because they expressed significant concerns about the physician request form as it had been constituted in Saskatoon. And it did require some pretty significant revisions, which I hope that the province will view as improvements. It tweaked some of the other components in Saskatoon, including there had been already some physician feedback on missing indications in the guidelines. And we developed tools for the stop the line process, and I'm going to come into that more fulsomely in a few moments. So in phase 1, what we're going to do is we're going to have a comprehensive data collection on indications and dosing in the province. And it's going to last approximately a year. The first step will be a pilot in our QHR, which is going to start on the 24th of June of this year. And once we've got, I guess, the bugs worked out or the rocks out of people's shoes, the rollout package that we've developed will then be provided to our partner health regions for implementation, I think most practically in the fall. And I will make myself as available as I can to the health regions in Saskatchewan to support local rollouts in terms of physician education or discussion as needed. Okay, so here are the components. So the program guidelines were developed, and these are really largely a product of the Saskatoon RPIW, and I think are a significant product of that in and of themselves, which talk about, so we've got them divided into adults and pediatric or neonatal indications. Sorry, this is not too as visible, but you'll all receive your own copies. They talk about medical conditions, give a sense of the prerequisites for IVIG treatment, and then recommend dose and duration of treatment based on best practice, other guidelines, again, all agreed to by the physician groups. And these are going to be available for our pilot on the RQHR intranet and also on the Government of Saskatchewan website. So a physician can then access these, seeing the patient in their office, considering the treatment with IVIG, making that decision to treat with IVIG, and then moving on to dosing. And I think the concept of ideal or adjusted body weight dosing is familiar to the pharmacists who may or may not be attending in terms of determining drug dosage in an obese patient when some drugs don't distribute very much into adipose tissue or fat. And the National Advisory Committee on Blood and Bloated Products supports the use of this type of dosing for IVIG in adult patients. And essentially the notion is to give the dose, find that dose that gives the maximum benefit with the minimum amount of risk. And this is just a tool to kind of, as a starting place to help people adjust their doses. So this is what it looks like, and I think it's just important to say that it's not suitable for use in pediatric patients or certainly people under the height of 60 inches, so 60 inches being about 5 feet. So I think given that we have time, I'll just switch over to show you how this works. So Let's say we want to give myself IVIG, so I'm 165 centimeters. I'm not very good at remembering this, so here we go. All right, so ideally, this is what I should weigh. Clearly, that is not what I do weigh, as you can see here. And dosing weight, and there's for lack of a better word, a fudge factor that you can see down below is described for how that works, but I think that's a conversation for another day. So if we decide you're going to treat me with, say, 2 grams per kilo for a neuro indication, the dose would be 129.5 based on this, and rounded dose, so rounded to the nearest 5 grams, because obviously we don't want to throw part of a vial, is 130. So let's say I weighed 100 kilograms. So 2 grams per kilo would be a 200 gram, or actually, 200 gram dose. Here you can see 55 grams. So, it makes a difference, and I think if we can give patients the clinical benefit with minimizing the risk, and I have seen people hemolyze a good 50 points in their hemoglobin with these high doses of IVIG. I think that's all to the good. So that basically demonstrates the function of that calculator, and it's not obligatory, but I think it's a useful tool to help support, finding that sort of sweet spot between risk and benefit. Okay, so the physician, they have thought about prescribing IVIG, they've decided on their course of treatment, they've got an appropriate dose for yours truly, and now they are going to find these orders. So this is formatted as a physician pre-printed order. It's formatted in the RQHR style because obviously that's where we live. And I'll just go here to show you a little more closely the things that it includes. So I think the fairly standard things like patient identifiers, where, the region and facility or ward, patient weight and height. Clinical urgency is what our nursing partners ask for. How soon do we need to book this appointment? Informed consent obtained, and it has to be obtained. Please send it in for outpatient orders. Indications, so trying to develop a drop-down functionality, and I'll show you that later. That may require a little wizardry for me at home on my computer. And if the indication isn't on this list, then people can simply write in their indication, although it must be legible. And then the next set of orders just, make a sort of a work standard for ordering IVIG in terms of blood work prior to the initial treatment, blood work around maintenance, some useful pre-meds or treatments for adverse reactions. These are the Regina Qu'Appelle rates, so we may wish to have a provincial discussion about that. And then, information collection. So was the ideal or adjusted body weight used for dosing? I think eventually we may want to ask physicians why they chose not to, and I'm sure they'll have very valid reasons. An indicator to provide patient information up front. And I'll show you how we're trying to support that further on, and then a decision of when there would be follow-up. So this, again, during the pilot will be made available on the RQHR intranet at saskatchewan.ca, and eventually, once it's a more agreed upon provincial form, it can be put into the physician EMR, such as Accuro and MedAccess, to be available at the point of care. So it'll be right there in their office, available to be filled out and either printed or auto-faxed to the infusion clinic or the local facility. So this just highlights, the drop-down functionality in terms of accepted indications. But of course, physicians are most welcome to write in a different indication at this point. It also provides some instructions for users, and these are RQHR specific. So, fill out the form. If it's an outpatient, fax it to infusions. If it's an inpatient, phone and fax it to the blood bank. So just helping and providing some links in case people want to look at the guidelines. And it's also kitted, and I must, if Jennifer's out there in Kenora, thank her for this idea, is that we've kitted it with the patient information. So there's actually, this is longer, but right there at the point of care, physicians can print off just the PPO for old patients, or if it's a new patient, they can print it off, the patient can read the stuff, and then I think it's a basis for a very good informed consent discussion, and that was feedback from patients in that they didn't feel like they were as informed as they could be at the point when the treatment was decided on, and sometimes they didn't get information at all, or it came afterwards from the nurses in the infusion clinic, etc. So hopefully that supports good informed consent and a well-informed patient population. Okay, so I'm Dr. X, and I filled out the form, and as you can see here, it is illegible, and I have not completed most of it. So what's going to happen now? Stop. We will stop the line, because that is clearly an incomplete and illegible order. So this new order form, it will be used for all IVIG requests. So it is both an order form and a data collection tool to get that very, very valuable data, both in cases of shortage and in phase 2 moving forward. The physician will be contacted with a request to review and revise the form. So we have developed work standards to support these conversations, because I think we all realize these are not easy conversations to have, and they're often conversations people aren't used to having, either from a nursing/lab perspective or from a physician perspective. So we're going to trial those in our QHR and get a sense of how they work. But the people in the RPIW who are frontline staff worked hard on that, and they seem pleased. So we'll see how that goes. The exception would, of course, be a life-threatening situation, but these will still be followed up to get the order on the right form once the patient's stable, because we really, really do need these data as a province and as a people to support best practice and management of shortages. Okay, so once the form is filled out correctly, we've got 2 thumbs up. The blood bank can process the order either directly, or if it's sent over from the infusions clinic, the patient can receive his or her treatment. And then the form is passed along to the transfusion safety office for data entry into fluid surveys data collection tool. So that is a confidential and secure tool that creates a registry of IVIG patients and their indications, their prescribing physicians, etc. And then each time the transfusion service issues IVIG, the amount issued will be recorded in a de-identified database, but that can be matched back to the other one. So basically, if there's a shortage, we can readily identify patients who are actively receiving IVIG treatment, their indication, their prescribing physician. So if we're in a really crisis situation, we can know very, very quickly who is at highest priority, who we need to talk to, what facilities they're at, etc. So I think this will really be a strength. Some of the information for patients, a lot of this was developed initially in the RPIW in Saskatoon and has been tweaked in Regina. So there's a program letter to the IVIG recipient, which basically just explains the program to people who are currently receiving IVIG. There's adult and pediatric versions of information about the product. And again, they're going to be kitted with the pre-printed orders. And one development that we came up with in Regina, and I thank the people who participated for that, was an IVIG patient logbook. And it's a tool that the patient or their family can carry that talks about the risks of IVIG treatment, the signs and symptoms of adverse events, allows them to track appointments. It contains a wallet card. It's actually really quite slick, and I think they're rightly proud of it. So once we've done all this work, phase 2 we'll have a data set. We'll know where we're at as a province, which I think we just don't right now in any meaningful, systematic way. And what this can then do is, because we have these data, we can provide feedback to individual prescribers or specialist groups about their use of IVIG, how many times it's on within the accepted guidelines, how many times it's without. We can provide information like, let's say we want to provide to the SMO or whatever, you know, what proportion of IVIG is used by what specialty, et cetera, et cetera. So I think just getting a really good understanding of how we're using this product in the province. And then just to see, consult with physicians and other stakeholders, of course, if there are need for more supports to appropriate utilization. So, I mean, if we're all using IVIG as if it's a textbook use and it's all perfect, there'll be no further argument, we just can stop, which is great. And I think if there's problem areas or concerns, then we're gonna have to interact with our physician prescribers and just talk about that and see how that's gonna work. And I mean, you know, there's I think lots of ideas out there, both from either pharmacy or change literature, but we'll have to propose those and discuss how we want to deal with this, you know, as a province. And then thereafter, the guidelines would be used on an ongoing basis, and the form would be used as an ongoing basis. And certainly our vision is that the guidelines will be a living document, not the 2015 guidelines that are sort of here dead under a stone and everyone ignores because they don't get updated. That they should evolve based on evidence as indications have better evidence, that they'll enter into the guidelines, and perhaps as, you know, certain diseases are, you know, IVIG is no longer a favored therapy, that those indications could be removed. Okay, so next steps. So in our QHR, I think our job is to roll out the adult PPO, and I have partners who have been kind enough to be willing to partner and develop both pediatric and neonatal PPOs for IVIG. I think to make a truly comprehensive program, there's also, as most of you know, subcutaneous immune globulin, which is often used as home therapy, and that we will develop pre-printed orders and other documents to support that use, because obviously that is likewise a precious and expensive product, and we shall also track it in our database. And then as we move forward, we will on an ongoing basis be entering data into our fluid surveys collection tools. So I guess what I'm here to ask, and this is where the timelines differ from our original rollout, and I apologize to the other health regions for that. I hope you can see the reasons that the form required pretty significant modifications. Is if you could take back the revised documents and the new ones as they come out, particularly the PPO, because I understand it's based on a Regina Qu'Appelle format, to your physician groups for review. And I hope that Saskatoon will be willing to do this, and we'll be probably interacting with the sponsor for the original RPIW to help have that happen, because we want to have a provincially consistent and acceptable process. And then once the process has run for about 60 days in Regina Qu'Appelle, and we've kind of got all the rocks out of their shoes, and I see some ladies here in the room who are going to identify those rocks and help us get them out, we'll plan for a rollout in the fall with packages being distributed to our other partner health regions. And that if you could just plan for a rollout in the fall, you know, as appropriate to your local setting, whenever the Practitioner Staff Affairs Committee is, or Pharmacy and Therapeutics, or however you want to integrate that into your physician consultation education, and also I presume nursing and lab education. So in summary, I hope I've given you a sense of our new immune globulin optimization program. I hope that people understand the reasons that we're taking a very active interest in IVIG in Saskatchewan, and you know, what it's useful for and what we hope to accomplish. And we've touched upon the new guidelines, the physician's order form, which is also a data collection tool, the stop-the-line process and the tools we have developed and will trial to support it, and the use of the adjusted body weight dose calculator. So I'd just like to, before I open for questions and discussion, I'd like to give a really big thank you to everyone who's been involved, particularly those in the RPIWs and the people who supported, if not participants, supported the RPIWs for all their hard work and innovative thinking, because I think we're taking a new step as a province in terms of how we're managing this plasma protein product. And I think it'll yield some real fruit as time goes on, but it is definitely a change.